Rutherford Beachard Hayes was an Ohio gentleman and a complex political figure who became one of the most controversial presidents in American history. Rutherford Beachard Hayes, Union General and later President, was born in Delaware, Ohio on October 4, 1822. He came from a modest family. His father, also named Rutherford Hayes, died 10 weeks before his birth, leaving his mother Sophia Beachard Hayes to raise him and his sister Fanny. He had a studious appearance with his full beard. Hayes's early years were marked by ambition and determination, shaped significantly by his uncle Sardis Beachard, who became a father figure and benefactor to the fatherless boy. Hayes attended local schools in Delaware and showed early academic promise. His uncle Sardis recognized the boy's potential and provided financial support for his education. In 1838, Hayes enrolled at Kenyon College in Gambia, Ohio. He excelled in his studies, graduating as valedictorian of his class in 1842. His education there shaped his understanding of law, politics, and civic duty, though his later career would test those lessons in ways he could never have imagined during his college years. After graduating from Kenyon College, Hayes decided to pursue a legal career. He enrolled at Harvard Law School, one of the most prestigious legal institutions in the country. He graduated in 1845 and was admitted to the Ohio bar. Hayes began his legal practice in Lower Sandusky, Ohio, now known as Fremont, where his uncle Sardis lived. However, the small town offered limited opportunities for an ambitious young lawyer. In 1849, Hayes moved to Cincinnati, Ohio's largest city, where he believed he could build a more substantial legal practice. In Cincinnati, Hayes established himself as a capable attorney. He took on a variety of cases, including criminal defense work. His practice grew steadily, and he developed a reputation as a thorough and ethical lawyer. Hayes was particularly known for his willingness to defend unpopular clients and causes. He defended several fugitive slaves in cases brought under the Fugitive Slave Act, work that reflected his growing opposition to slavery. These cases were controversial and sometimes dangerous, but Hayes believed in the principle that everyone deserved legal representation. During his Cincinnati years, Hayes also became involved in local politics and social causes. He joined the Literary Club, a discussion group that brought together the city's intellectual elite. He became active in the Sons of Temperance, reflecting his belief in moral reform. He also developed connections with the emerging Republican Party, which opposed the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. These associations would shape his political future. In 1852, Hayes married Lucy Ware Webb, a graduate of Cincinnati's Wesleyan Female College. Lucy was an intelligent and principled woman who shared Hayes's opposition to slavery. She was deeply religious and would become known for her strong moral convictions. The marriage was happy and produced 8 children, though 3 died in infancy. Lucy would be an important influence on Hayes throughout his life, and her views on temperance and social reform would later influence his presidency. By the late 1850s, Hayes had become increasingly involved in Republican Party politics. He was appointed Cincinnati City Solicitor in 1858, his first public office. The position involved representing the city in legal matters and provided Hayes with valuable experience in public administration. He served competently in this role, enhancing his reputation as a capable public servant. However, his tenure as city solicitor was interrupted by the outbreak of the Civil War in April 1861. When the Civil War began, Hayes was nearly 39 years old, married with children, and established in his legal career. He had every reason to remain at home. However, he felt a strong sense of duty to defend the Union. He wrote in his diary that he would prefer to die in the war than to live through it without having served. In June 1861, Hayes was commissioned as a major in the 23rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. His regiment was assigned to Western Virginia, where Union forces were working to secure the region and prevent it from joining the Confederacy. Hayes proved to be a capable and courageous officer. He took his military responsibilities seriously, studying tactics and caring for his men. His legal training served him well in the administrative aspects of command. In September 1861, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel. His regiment participated in several small engagements in Western Virginia, learning the realities of warfare through these early experiences. Hayes demonstrated both bravery and competence, earning the respect of his soldiers. The 23rd Ohio Infantry included several men who would later achieve prominence. William McKinley, who would become president in 1897, served as a commissary sergeant in the regiment. Hayes took note of the young McKinley and would later support his political career. The regiment also included future congressman and diplomat Stanley Matthews. These connections would prove valuable in Hayes's post-war political career. In September 1862, Hayes participated in the Battle of South Mountain in Maryland. During the fighting, he was severely wounded when a musket ball struck his left arm above the elbow, fracturing the bone. Rather than leaving the field, Hayes had his arm bandaged and continued to lead his men until the battle ended. His courage under fire earned him widespread praise and promotion to colonel. The wound took months to heal and left his arm permanently weakened, but Hayes recovered sufficiently to return to duty. Following his recovery, Hayes and his regiment participated in several campaigns in West Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley. In 1864, he was given command of the 1st Brigade of the Kanawha Division. His brigade fought in the Valley campaigns of 1864 under General Philip Sheridan. These were brutal operations designed to destroy the agricultural resources of the Shenandoah Valley and eliminate it as a source of supplies for the Confederate Army. Hayes's brigade participated in the battles of Opequon, Fisher's Hill, and Cedar Creek. At Cedar Creek in October 1864, Hayes had his horse shot from under him but escaped injury. His performance in these battles earned him promotion to brigadier general in October 1864. Hayes's military service was distinguished by steady competence rather than brilliance. He was not a great tactical innovator, but he was brave, reliable, and cared for his men. His soldiers respected him, and his superiors trusted him. He was wounded 5 times during the war, had 4 horses shot from under him, and earned a reputation as one of the most combat-tested officers in the Union Army. By the time the war ended, he had been promoted to brevet major general, a recognition of his faithful service. While Hayes was still in the field in 1864, Ohio Republicans nominated him for Congress. Hayes refused to campaign, stating that any officer who would abandon his post to campaign for Congress ought to be scalped. This principled stance enhanced his reputation and he won election easily. However, he did not take his seat until after the war ended. He resigned his commission in June 1865 and finally joined Congress in December of that year. Hayes served 2 terms in the House of Representatives from 1865 to 1867. He was a loyal Republican who supported the radical Republican program of Reconstruction. He voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed citizenship and equal protection under the law to former slaves. He supported military reconstruction of the South and voting rights for freedmen. His voting record reflected his belief that the Union victory should result in fundamental changes in American society, particularly regarding the rights of African Americans. However, Hayes was not entirely comfortable in Congress. He found the legislative process frustrating and the partisan atmosphere of Washington distasteful. He preferred executive roles where he could implement policy rather than debate it. When Ohio Republicans approached him about running for governor in 1867, he welcomed the opportunity. He resigned from Congress and successfully ran for governor, winning by a narrow margin. Hayes served as governor of Ohio from 1868 to 1872, and then again from 1876 to 1877. His first 2 terms were marked by moderate, reform-oriented policies. He worked to establish a state geological survey, reform the state prison system, and improve treatment of the mentally ill. He supported the ratification of the 15th Amendment, which prohibited denial of voting rights based on race. He advocated for merit-based civil service reform, arguing that government positions should be awarded based on competence rather than political loyalty. These positions established Hayes as a reform-minded Republican. After declining to run for a 3rd consecutive term in 1872, Hayes temporarily retired from politics. He spent 3 years focusing on his family and business interests. However, the Ohio Republican Party persuaded him to run for governor again in 1875. The campaign was seen as a test of Republican strength nationally, as the party had been damaged by corruption scandals during the Grant administration. Hayes ran on a platform of honest government and sound money, opposing the inflationary policies advocated by Democrats. He won a narrow victory that attracted national attention. Hayes's victory in Ohio made him a potential presidential candidate for 1876. The Republican Party needed a candidate who could distance the party from the corruption of the Grant years while maintaining party unity. Hayes fit this profile perfectly. He had a distinguished war record, a reputation for honesty, and moderate views that could appeal to reformers without alienating party regulars. At the Republican National Convention in Cincinnati in June 1876, Hayes emerged as a compromise candidate and won the nomination on the 7th ballot. The 1876 presidential election became one of the most controversial in American history. Hayes faced Democrat Samuel Tilden, the reform governor of New York. The campaign focused on corruption, economic policy, and Reconstruction. Tilden won the popular vote by a margin of about 250,000 votes out of more than 8 million cast. However, the electoral vote was disputed. Returns from South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, and Oregon were contested, with both parties claiming victory in those states. The Constitution provided no clear mechanism for resolving disputed electoral votes. The country faced a genuine constitutional crisis. Some Democrats threatened armed resistance if Tilden was denied the presidency. Congress eventually created a special electoral commission composed of senators, representatives, and Supreme Court justices to resolve the disputes. The commission, which had a Republican majority, voted along party lines to award all disputed electoral votes to Hayes, giving him a 185 to 184 electoral vote victory. The decision was accepted only after secret negotiations between Hayes's representatives and Southern Democrats. In what became known as the Compromise of 1877, Hayes's supporters agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction, in exchange for Democratic acceptance of Hayes's election. Hayes also agreed to appoint a Southerner to his cabinet and support federal funding for internal improvements in the South. This compromise allowed Hayes to take office but forever tainted his presidency with questions about its legitimacy. Hayes was inaugurated on March 5, 1877, after taking the oath of office privately on March 3 because Inauguration Day fell on a Sunday. He entered office under a cloud of controversy, with many Democrats referring to him as Rutherford Hayes or his fraudulency. The circumstances of his election would shadow his entire presidency and limit his political effectiveness. True to the Compromise of 1877, Hayes withdrew federal troops from South Carolina and Louisiana in April 1877, ending the last Republican state governments in the South. This decision effectively ended Reconstruction and allowed white Democrats to regain control of Southern state governments. The withdrawal was controversial among Republicans, particularly African Americans and their white allies who saw it as a betrayal of the principles for which the Civil War had been fought. Hayes believed that military occupation was no longer sustainable and that reconciliation with the white South was necessary for national healing. However, the consequences for Southern blacks were severe, as the end of federal protection led to the systematic disenfranchisement and oppression that would last for generations. Despite the controversial beginning, Hayes pursued a reform agenda as president. He was committed to civil service reform and opposed the spoils system that had led to corruption in the Grant administration. He issued an executive order prohibiting federal employees from participating in political campaigns or being required to make political contributions. He fought with Senator Roscoe Conkling of New York, the leader of the Republican Party's stalwart faction, over patronage appointments. When Conkling's allies in the New York Custom House refused to implement Hayes's reforms, Hayes removed them from office, including future President Chester Arthur. This battle established Hayes's independence but made him enemies within his own party. Hayes also faced significant labor unrest during his presidency. In July 1877, just months after taking office, the Great Railroad Strike erupted when railroad companies cut wages. The strike spread across the country, paralyzing rail traffic and leading to violent confrontations between strikers and state militia. Hayes deployed federal troops to restore order, the first use of federal troops to break a strike. His action was controversial, criticized by labor advocates as favoring corporations over workers. Hayes believed he had a constitutional duty to ensure that interstate commerce could function, but the incident highlighted the growing tensions between labor and capital in industrializing America. On monetary policy, Hayes supported the gold standard and opposed inflation. He vetoed the Bland-Allison Act, which would have required the government to purchase and coin silver, potentially inflating the currency. Congress overrode his veto, but Hayes had established his position in favor of sound money. This stance pleased Eastern financial interests but angered farmers and debtors who favored inflation to ease their debt burdens. Hayes's presidency also dealt with Native American policy. He appointed Carl Schurz, a reform-minded German immigrant, as Secretary of the Interior. Schurz attempted to reform the corrupt Indian Bureau and improve conditions on reservations. However, the fundamental policy remained one of forced assimilation and confinement to reservations. Hayes supported efforts to civilize Native Americans through education and Christianity, reflecting the paternalistic attitudes of the era. The Nez Perce War of 1877 occurred during his presidency, ending with Chief Joseph's famous surrender speech. In foreign policy, Hayes's presidency was relatively quiet. He dealt with disputes over fishing rights with Canada and worked to improve relations with Mexico. He also took interest in a potential canal across Central America, declaring in a message to Congress that any such canal would be under American control, foreshadowing the later Panama Canal policy. His foreign policy was generally cautious and avoided major conflicts. Lucy Hayes, the First Lady, brought her strong moral convictions to the White House. She banned alcohol from White House functions, earning the nickname Lemonade Lucy. This policy reflected both her personal beliefs and Hayes's political calculation that supporting temperance would appeal to an important reform constituency. The alcohol ban was mocked by some but praised by temperance advocates. Lucy Hayes was also the First Lady to have graduated from college, and she took an active interest in social causes, particularly veterans' welfare. Hayes had announced before taking office that he would serve only one term. This decision was partly strategic, intended to position himself as above politics, but it also reflected his genuine distaste for the partisan battles of Washington. As his term progressed, he became increasingly frustrated with congressional opposition and intra-party feuding. He looked forward to retirement and the opportunity to focus on causes he cared about without the constraints of political office. When Hayes left office in March 1881, he retired to his estate, Spiegel Grove, in Fremont, Ohio. His post-presidential years were active and fulfilling. He devoted himself to philanthropic and educational causes. He became a trustee of Ohio State University and worked to promote education, particularly for African Americans in the South. He served as president of the Peabody Education Fund, which supported black education in the South. He also worked with the Slater Fund, another organization devoted to African American education. These activities reflected his continued belief in the importance of education for former slaves, even as his withdrawal of federal troops had facilitated their political oppression. Hayes also remained active in veterans affairs. He served as president of the National Prison Reform Association, advocating for humane treatment of prisoners and rehabilitation rather than purely punitive approaches to criminal justice. He spoke frequently on topics of reform, education, and national unity. His post-presidential years were marked by a consistency of principle and genuine commitment to public service that had characterized his entire career. Hayes's personal life in retirement was marked by both contentment and tragedy. He and Lucy enjoyed their time at Spiegel Grove, surrounded by family and engaged in meaningful work. However, in June 1889, Lucy died suddenly of a stroke. Hayes was devastated by the loss of his partner of 37 years. He wrote that his life had been so happy, so successful, so undisturbed with her, and her death left him bereft. He continued his public activities but never fully recovered from her loss. On January 14, 1893, while traveling by train to Cleveland, Hayes suffered a heart attack. He was brought back to Spiegel Grove, where he died 3 days later on January 17, 1893. He was 70 years old. His last words reportedly were, "I know that I'm going where Lucy is." Hayes was buried next to Lucy at Spiegel Grove. His funeral was attended by thousands, including President-elect Grover Cleveland, reflecting the respect Hayes had earned in his post-presidential years. Hayes's legacy is complex and controversial. His presidency was constrained by the circumstances of his election and his one-term pledge. He accomplished less than he hoped in civil service reform, though he established principles that would guide later reformers. His withdrawal of troops from the South ended Reconstruction and abandoned African Americans to decades of oppression, though he continued to support black education in his retirement. He was honest and principled in an era of corruption, but his presidency lacked the political skill to translate principles into lasting achievements. Modern historians have offered mixed assessments of Hayes. Some credit him with restoring integrity to the presidency after the Grant scandals and with beginning the process of civil service reform. Others condemn him for ending Reconstruction and betraying African Americans. Most acknowledge that he faced extraordinarily difficult circumstances and conducted himself with personal honor, even if his policy choices were questionable. His presidency marked a transition from the issues of the Civil War and Reconstruction to the issues of industrialization and reform that would dominate the late 19th century. Hayes represents a particular type of political leader, the principled moderate who seeks to balance competing interests and promote gradual reform. He was neither a radical nor a reactionary, but rather a cautious reformer who believed in working within existing institutions. His tragedy was that the circumstances of his election and the political constraints of his time prevented him from achieving more substantial reforms. His decision to end Reconstruction, while perhaps politically necessary, had devastating consequences that he did not fully anticipate or address. In the end, Rutherford Hayes was neither a great president nor a failed one, but rather a decent man who did his best in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. His legacy includes both his efforts at reform and his abandonment of Reconstruction. He is remembered today primarily for the disputed election of 1876 and for ending Reconstruction, which is perhaps incomplete for a man who served his country faithfully in war and peace and devoted his retirement to education and reform. Hayes was, even in death, a man of contradictions, remembered for political controversy rather than for his genuine integrity and his commitment to public service.